The overall motivation for having a roundtable discussion is, well, just to allow an opportunity for some audience participation, and also just provide a more interactive format to maybe mull over some of the information that you've seen that's been presented here today, and for us to have a greater discussion about what this means for energy sustainability. So right now we're going to talk about what this means for energy sustainability in Juneau. I'm going to ask if you have, this is also an opportunity to ask general questions to the speakers, but I'm going to ask if you have questions like that, just write those down, hang on to them, and we'll provide some opportunity towards the end of this hour for you to ask specific questions to the speakers. But for right now, I'm going to ask each of the roundtable participants to introduce themselves. Let us know who you are. So a couple of people here have not actually presented today, so it'll be good to hear from them. And then I'm also going to ask each of them a question, and that is, what are the most important things we can do to improve energy sustainability in Juneau? It doesn't have to be improve, it could be maintain or address energy sustainability in Juneau, given what your expertise is, given what you've seen here today, and given just what your personal interests are. And then we'll give them an opportunity to speak, and then I will turn the audience loose with that question as well. So we want to hear, what are recommendations here? What can Juneau do to improve energy sustainability at large? And with that, I'll turn it loose to the roundtable participants. Are you mic'd up there? Yep, should be mic'd. Okay. So do you want to
start here?
Lead us off? Yep.
My name is Scott Willis. I'm an engineer in the generation department at AEL&P, the local electric utility. And I think I didn't, when I was answering questions in my presentation, when I sat down, I wished I would have talked more about the things that we can do for personal energy efficiency. If we think about energy sustainability in Juneau, I tried to point out that we're very fortunate to have renewable hydro providing almost all of our electricity, but that might be limited in the future depending on the projects that are identified to be developed. So I think the thing that we can all do to enhance the sustainability is to make those hydro projects last as long as possible, and to do that by doing the kinds of things to use less energy ourselves. To replace your light bulbs with compact fluorescents, and to enhance the weather stripping and insulation value in your home, and be more thoughtful about the way you use electricity. So I guess that's what I would say. There's not a silver bullet. It's doing some of these things that may seem sort of mundane and not quite as glamorous, but I think that's an important thing because it's doable today.
I'm David Lockard. I'm an engineer and a program manager with the Alaska Energy Authority, and as an engineer I have the same ideas he does. Energy efficiency, I think, is really the place to start, and I'll keep it short. The one other thing I would mention is to get involved. Get involved in local planning, in regional planning, statewide. Help your utility consider the different options that are available to them, get up to speed. I mean, I know very little about tidal energy, and here I am running the program for the state. And people don't know much about it yet, but we need to figure out whether it's going to impact whales, or fishing nets are going to take it out, or whether it's really a viable resource. So that's the one thing I would add to Scott's message is get involved.
Hi, my name is Sue Schrader. I work at Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, based here in Juneau. We are a coalition of 15 conservation groups, almost all of which are all volunteer groups, in 13 different communities extending from Ketchikan to Yakutat. And SEACC is indeed a grassroots organization, and we really strive to balance protecting and maintaining the integrity of the public lands in Southeast, which of course is predominantly the Tongass National Forest, and balancing that with our community's ability to use, to enjoy, and to make a living off of those lands. We've been around since the 1970s, and in the past, we've pretty much looked at energy projects, and predominantly here we're talking about hydropower projects and interties on kind of a case-by-case basis. And we're kind of well, I hate to characterize ourselves as such, but we sometimes end up being the skunk at the picnic. We do try to point out what are some of the ramifications of the bigger projects, some of the impacts, and try to do it in a constructive way, in a way that we can present alternatives. But really, we are the ones that kind of watchdog what some of the potential collateral damage is to, say, some of the bigger projects. Hydropower here in Southeast, I think most of us can really get behind and support, because we're looking at lake taps for the most part, or small dams. But if we were sitting here before a group in the Pacific Northwest that's more familiar with Snake River dams, there'd be a lot less enthusiasm for hydropower. Thankfully, hopefully we won't be going there. I don't know. The sit in a dam debate will be interesting. I think as far as the one thing we can all do, and it echoes a little bit of what Dave just said, and that would be to use our grassroots power to influence and move our political leaders and our corporate leaders along. I mean, I've changed all my bulbs to fluorescent, but on the other hand, I've watched for 2 years a very good bill languish, well, I shouldn't say languish because it'll probably pass this year, in the state legislature that would set up a grant and a loan program for small renewable projects, House Bill 152. And it continues to be debated. It looks like it's going to pass. It may even pass with a $300 million pot of money to kick it off, and that would be great. But that's taken a lot of effort on a lot of Alaskans' part to write to your legislators, to go down, to attend hearings, to testify, and to really move the legislators along. Corporate leaders, I guess when I think Juneau, I think corporate leaders, and I think energy, I think of the cruise ship industry. We've gotten one of the lines to hook up to shore power, but if you look at the amount of diesel fuel that's being used, it's not those of us in the room flying out to maybe our one trip a year to see our parents, or maybe that trip to get down to Mexico, Hawaii, but it's those cruise ships that are coming in and burning diesel fuel day after day after day. And the buses, the tourism buses that are on our streets burning fuel and contributing significantly to air pollution. So try to remember your power that you have over our elected officials and our corporate leaders, and we're going to have to move them along too, because I think the public's probably a little farther out ahead on these issues than many of our leaders.
Hi, I'm Ed Neal. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm a hydrologist here in Juneau, Alaska, and I've worked here for about 14 years now, and gauge streams all over Alaska, but primarily southeast. I feel a little bit of a disadvantage going forth here when everyone says, well, be more conservation, get involved, contact your politicians. This guy's got biologs, so he's probably going to cover that next. So I guess I would just tend to agree with the experts who have gone before me that conservation seems to be like one of our best measures that we could take right now, and hydropower looks like a good way to go. And model projections are for more precip. We should be fine. In Juneau, at least.
My name is Greg Brown. I'm retired. I have a degree in nuclear engineering and mechanical engineering. I was formerly the president and CEO of a company called Schneider Electric in Latin America and Canada. We call it Score D in the United States. I've worked pretty much all over the world at one point in time or another. I was also the president and CEO of Xantrax, which some of you might have our inverters in your boats, or in your, if you're off the grid at all, you might have one of our inverters. Currently, I'm even though I'm retired 99% of the time, I'm also president of a company called Mackay, and what we're doing there is putting in solar panels on top of Walmarts, 1 megawatt on top of each Walmart, and there's a financial deal But these are being installed in Southern California right now. We've done 11 of them so far, and we're going to be continuing to do those, mostly with BP Power, BP Solar Company. Has many good ideas. I was in a bar about 2 months ago and having a drink, and somebody asked about biomass. So I started doing an investigation on biomass, which is now actually turning into a study, which we're going to be doing for the airport. What we started looking at is waste products in Juneau. And we looked at wood. There are literally hundreds of thousands of tons of waste wood that's used at each mill. The Viking mill alone has 40,000 tons every year of sawdust, just one mill. And this bio brick is made of that. We looked at cardboard, recycled cardboard. This bio brick is made of that. We looked at mixed paper. And with the Capitol Legislature here, we are where you have plenty of extra waste paper, I'm sure about that. And this one down here, because it has an odor to it, is even sewage. I put it down here so my friend here wouldn't get asphyxiated.
Want to pass that around?
And Homeland Security actually did an investigation on this when we shipped it in here. They opened up the box, so they want to make sure what kind of shit we're moving into Alaska. Anyway, and it has potential energy to it. And what we've been doing, I actually converted my home over to biomass. That's how I'm heating it instead of oil, and reduced my cost by 30%, and in a fairly efficient home. But we're doing a study right now for the airport with the idea of being able to, their expansion of heating that with using biomass. And one of the neat things about it is the facilities are not very difficult to produce this. It's not very difficult to do. One of the options we've actually looked at is putting it on a barge and moving the barge to places like Angoon or Prince of Wales or whatever, and let it operate there and build the products right there so they can actually come up with their own either hot water or steam generation, when hydro is the best. There's no doubt about that, but in most cases. But this is another alternative, a lot less expensive, and it's something that can be completed within a year. So it has a complete plant, including the production of it. So it has some advantages from that standpoint. I'll be presenting it to the first pass of this to the airport authority next month. But the neat thing about it is when the cruise ships come in and they want to get rid of some of this stuff and some of their waste paper, because they have very good recycling programs, they may even pay us to take it. And so we would be having a negative raw material costs that we could process it. Now, it does have some kind of limits on how much waste you have, and also second growth forest is one of the things the Forest Service has talked to us about being able to utilize this for. But it is something that can be done fairly quickly, fairly easily, fairly on low scales, small scales if you want to. Anyway, that's the project I'm working on.
Great. We have one other participant from San Francisco. He's actually a UAS professor. He can explain what he's doing in San Francisco himself. But he's given me an introduction here. Rick is an assistant professor of marketing and entrepreneurship at UAS School of Management. He writes that all of my classes, undergraduate and MBA classes, are online, and my students are live all over Alaska, or attend class live all over Alaska. I even had a student this fall attend class from Afghanistan. I'm a distance PhD student at Leeds Metropolitan University in the UK. My research interests include working with eco-entrepreneurs in rural Alaska, including Juneau, to help them achieve high growth, 20-plus employees and 20% per year profit growth, and help them to be environmentally positive. And hang on a sec, as far as his recommendation for what Juneau can do. He writes, Juneau can work to stimulate private sector activity related to renewable energy and energy efficiency. As these companies grow, they create wealth and entrepreneurial expertise that can be reinvested in renewable energy and energy efficiency. If you don't want to be an entrepreneur in this field, then find a good management team that is running a company and consider helping that company to grow by making a private equity investment in the company. So with that, let's just open it up to the audience. We might have some experts here, or perhaps non-expert too, and that's okay. I'm certainly not one. And it would be interesting to hear what are your recommendations to improve, address, maintain energy sustainability here in Juneau.
I was intrigued by the idea of the ground source heat pumps, and wondering if anybody's pursuing, or if there are any businesses in town that are looking to work with residential homeowners on installing these devices. I imagine they're fairly expensive right now, but obviously if demand was there, the prices probably would come down. Are you aware of anybody working in that space in our community?
I'm not. When AEL&P put in their ground source heat pump when they built their new office building in Lemon Creek, we had to bring a drilling contractor and a heat pump installer from outside the community. I don't remember where they came from, Gale, Anchorage, or Seattle. I don't remember where they came from. And then there's also the issue of, okay, you get it installed in the ground, then you need somebody to actually maintain the compressors and things. And that's a little more conventional, refrigeration cycle kinds of things. But I'm not sure there's really anybody that's specialized in that. Now, let me mention two other things. There are some forms of ground source heat pump where you don't have to drill these holes. You have loops of what you just dig a sort of a big trench and have coils in there, and so that's a little easier to install, but it would still take some training. And then there are also air-to-air heat pumps. So a ground source heat pump takes heat out of the ground. Air-to-air heat pumps take heat out of the air, and it's funny to think of 40-degree air heating your home with 40-degree air, but that's what heat pump technology does, is takes a lot of low heat and concentrates it to be a little bit of high heat. And there are some air-to-air heat pumps that some people have in town. But I'm not aware of anybody in town that's actually promoting or installing that. But there may be some that I'm not aware of.
Actually, if I could also respond to that, I think this is one of the areas where there's an opportunity for new businesses. I run the geothermal program for the state, and in the past, I've typically gotten a call every few years on heat pumps. In the last 6 months, I've gotten about 4, and some people were pretty worked up. They really wanted to find somebody who would put a heat pump in for them. There's also, one of the interesting things about this, we talk about different technologies, but none of these, or as far as I know, none of these technologies are static. Diesel gen sets are changing very, very fast, believe it or not, in terms of efficiency and operation. And so heat pumps are changing. And at the national level, there's research and development being done on hybrid heat pumps that run on both their air-to-air, but then when the air is warmer, and then when the air temperature drops below a certain point, they switch to a ground source, and you can put in a smaller ground loop and actually have a more economically attractive heat pump with that kind of technology. But I would conclude that there is an opportunity for contractors, heat pump contractors all over Alaska.
Question for Scott. I guess it was nice to hear from Ed that they expect the runoffs to be higher than normal. Scott, who at AEL&P makes the decision of when you guys sell non-firm energy?
So what we're talking about here is we've got some loads. We've got what we call our firm loads. When people, when they turn on their lights or when they heat their home with electricity, that's a firm load, and we're required to serve that load. This goes back, I didn't get into this, but if you remember my graph where you've got the big jump when you bring a new hydro project on, and relatively low use of that hydro project, that's a difficult thing for the community, because the people the banks we borrow money from to build that hydro project, they want to be paid back once it's built. And if we went and said, well, we're only using 10% of it now, so why don't we just pay you 10% of the loan, and we'll pay you the rest when we grow into it. They don't like that very much. And so what happens when you get that step increase when you bring on a new hydro project, you also get a step increase in costs. And ideally, you'd like to spread those costs among as many electric sales as possible. Otherwise, our customers see this big rate increase. And so one thing we did back in the Snettisham days when Phase 2 came online, we said, here's a big increase in cost that's going to be passed on to our customers. Is there anything we can do to stimulate more sales that will help pay for that? And we particularly wanted to stimulate sales that could be there to help pay for the project in the early years, and then maybe could go away as firm loads grew, and we needed that for those sorts of loads. And so we developed some non-firm customers. We got some government offices and businesses and homes that had two heating systems, that had an oil heating system and electric heating system. They were using their oil because oil was much cheaper at the time. And so we developed a market-based rate. We said, look, we've got a bunch of electricity that's just going to spill over the dam, flow out to sea, and be lost forever. That is of zero value to us now. But if we price that so it was competitive with the cost of oil, we could entice some people and businesses that are heating their space with oil to heat with electricity. Use some of that surplus energy that would have gone to waste anyway, and get some money for it that can help pay for that project. And so we developed some programs like that. Our dual fuel program is one of those. The program to plug in the Princess ships to shore power is another one of those. So those programs, as well as the connection to the Greens Creek mine, those programs are what we call surplus programs, meaning those entities only get hydropower when we have surplus power available. And then when surplus power is not available, we disconnect them and say, sorry, go on your other form of generation. Now, your question was specifically who makes that decision. At AEL&P, the managers sit down and we talk about how much water's in the reservoir, what the prospects are for spilling from the reservoir that fall, and then make a decision as to whether or not there's surplus hydro available to be able to give to these customers so that we can get additional revenues to be able to pay off this large investment in hydro. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, somewhat. And I'm speaking from a disadvantage. I don't have the opportunity, or haven't had the opportunity, to look at the lake levels, as when I called and asked for them, I was denied that information from your office. And so I don't know what was there, but I'm concerned that you guys oversold and anticipated excess of hydroelectricity to Greens Creek, to Princess, and your non-firm customers, which left the depleted lake levels. And I would cite your filing, you being AEL&P, I would cite your filing with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, who is your governing body. I think it was October that you guys wrote all this information to them, saying that they started off low from a colder than anticipated winter with low watershed flows into your lakes. And you cited 4 or 5 different times throughout last summer where the flows were not coming in, quote, as high as we had anticipated, yet you continued to sell non-firm power, which is projected excess. So you left the lakes low, and then this year, this winter, the homeowners, the people of this room, are paying 30% more for power.
What was your question?
I guess essentially who botched it? I mean, clearly, Scott, there's a problem. And I've read all the filings with the RCA. And the RCA was very liberal in allowing you guys the opportunity to, you're a profit-based industry, and rightfully so. I'm an economics major, so there's no argument there. You deserve a return on your investment. The problem comes in when you're selling electricity that doesn't exist, and there's no reason for you guys not to make a mistake other than public flack. It doesn't matter what your costs are. Essentially, you're going to recoup your costs and a percentage. So who's your watchdog? Who's there to make sure that you guys make the right decision or make the right choice so that, a 30% increase in the cost of electricity? I mean, it was enough of an increase, fortunately for you guys, that the loads for this winter, the fourth quarter, I think, were not appreciably higher than the second and third quarters. and that information again comes from the RCA, that you report what kilowatt hours you sold, and you pay the RCA a percentage of that. So where does the buck stop?
You're correct. AEL&P is a private company that is regulated by an agency in the state of Alaska. Do you want to get into this, Sanjay? This is really sort of off the topic from sustainability.
It is, and I mean, I would say that if you want to provide an answer, go ahead. But one thing I would say is if you can spin that and provide us some constructive recommendations in terms of how to ameliorate that issue, please do.
Constructive recommendation would be not to sell expected, to do better job of managing what you do have, to have an equitable rate structure with or through the RCA, so that their and your it's written several times that the cost causer is the cost payer, and this clearly is not that case. The cost causer in this case would be yourselves, AEL&P, for selling any electricity that was not in excess, and also the receivers of that non-firm power, I mean, to the tune of 4.8 cents a kilowatt hour at Greens Creek, when it's their own cost is more around 18 cents. So they're getting a really sweetheart deal out of it.
We may be getting off topic somewhat. Here's what I'll volunteer to do. I'll meet anybody that wants to discuss this issue outside the door at the next break to go into that. If you'd like, I can talk more about that now, whatever you'd like, Sandy.
Why don't we, in the interest of staying on the task or topic of energy sustainability, and
But isn't hydro the most important source of energy in Juneau? I think it's directly on task.
Good morning. If I could bring it back on task a little bit. In my 30 years in Juneau, two predominant sources of renewable that I've seen are biomass growing around us and rainfall coming down on us. And I applaud the gentleman, Mr. Brown, taking that product, trying to recycle a waste stream into something with a fiber stress that might be useful in the construction industry. The built environment consumes about 40% of the energy load in our existence. Transportation is a large sector. And I think the transition into the future, we hear of hydrogen because of the environmental friendly aspects. We also see that our big potential rainfall and high elevation storage offers a potential to marry very well with transportation. Anyone who's taken a craft down the Inside Passage on the coast of British Columbia notices right away on your charts many high elevation lakes that are output to tidewater. So you have two ways to take this blessing of hydroelectric energy and distribute it either through intertie transmission generation systems or a waterborne system. Now hydrogen is somewhat one of those question marks that we've seen, but it looks like a good marriage to take high elevation lake taps in this part of the world and waterborne transport to market. So I don't know how that fits with gas on the North Slope, but it's certainly something that may have an economic marriage. We don't have to wait for a load to build. Transportation is one with us. Has hydrogen been looked at as a source of energy from Southeast Alaska to the Northwest?
you want to take that, Dave?
I think one answer is no. There has not been a comprehensive study with modeling done. My agency is monitoring the progress of hydrogen technology. For example, I guess it was last week I heard about a project in Iceland that's going to, there's going to be a demonstration at the end of April of a hydrogen-powered fishing vessel with an internal combustion engine, not a fuel cell, using the hydrogen. And the hydrogen, I'm guessing, well, they get 80% of their electricity from hydro and 20% from geothermal. So very likely a renewable resource to produce hydrogen and run it in a vessel. I certainly wouldn't discourage the interest in that. My agency is careful to focus on construction and applications, and we don't do research in-house. There's a new entity, a laboratory developing at UAF. It's called the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. And they're looking for funding, they're looking for good ideas to investigate, for valuable things to research for the state of Alaska. That's one of the things that would be potentially of interest to them. The contact there is Gwen Holdman. So there, from my perspective, there have been a lot of ideas tested, particularly in remote parts of Alaska, that were not successful. And as an engineer and a construction manager, I'm very cautious about testing new ideas in remote places. For example, the nuclear plant in Galena was mentioned earlier. I'd like to see one in Chicago that works successfully for 10 years. And then maybe think about putting it in Galena. So that would be my take on it. Hydrogen, as was mentioned earlier, it's technically feasible. You know, we know how to use it. There are some technological barriers and in terms of storage and so forth that are probably easy or possible to overcome. But the economics aren't there yet. And I believe there's better things to do with the electricity than make hydrogen today. In the long term, I think in 10, 20 years, I think there will be hydrogen or something similar, maybe ammonia, used around the state as an energy storage medium.
Before we leave this, I just want to follow up also on a comment you made about biomass and looking around at the trees. As most of you know, the Tongass has had been impacted by a lot of clear cuts starting a good 50 years ago. So we've got a lot of second growth, and that second growth provides great opportunity for woody biomass. It needs to be managed, and the Forest Service is aware of this. How exactly to do that managing, which involves particularly thinning it, still remains to be seen. Can be thinned for additional production of trees, also can be thinned for habitat value. And those two are not exactly aligned. But suffice to say, there's a lot of opportunity for providing the woody biomass. We've seen in the city of Craig, they're heating with biomass from sawmill. The main thing to keep in mind, I think, with woody biomass all around us is that we need to go forth with some good ecological standards and ensure that this as an energy source remains renewable. In other words, we don't want to be cutting down trees simply so we can burn them. The other big concern with biomass, of course, and it speaks again to remoteness, is you've got to look at what's the transportation cost to drive that truck from, say, the city of Klawock to where the trees are being thinned down the logging road. It's burning diesel just to pick up a load of slash to bring it back to a burner. So there's a lot of these ancillary costs that have to be factored in.
The couple of comments regarding the biomass and the hydrogen. You're exactly right. And the last thing I'd want to do is cut down trees to build biomass. I mean, that would be something that I'd personally be against. But there are lots of opportunities to get biomass too, including seaweed. In fact, we're doing an experiment starting tomorrow in Connecticut, and I'm flying there on Monday, where we're actually taking seaweed, making these, and we'll be testing the BTU output of a seaweed brick, if you will. So there are lots of opportunities to do that. Plus, you get other advantages from biomass. That you've got to get rid of the paper. Today, what do? We put it in a barge. We ship our recycled paper down to Seattle, and it's run by diesel all the way down there. So you get rid of that issue. Get rid of the issue of sludge from the sewage point of view. In regards to the couple comments regarding hydrogen, I used to work for huge companies, so I understand a lot of the questions and issues regarding huge companies. But we're looking at a project right now that would say, what would happen if we decided to make a hydrogen-powered snowplow for the airport? And since we're a little private group, we can kind of look at whatever we want to look at. So we're doing those calculations, and if you want to give me your card afterward, I'd be happy to show you what those calculations look like. We're probably about 3 weeks away from actually having that done. But taking electricity, turning it into hydrogen, using seawater. Hydrogen's been around forever. The Hindenburg was powered by hydrogen back in the 20s. So it is a very viable technology. And there are some technical issues about it, there's no doubt about it, but we'll find out what the real cost of producing it's gonna be and see if we can make a snowplow for the airport out of hydrogen.
I had a question about sort of the carbon emission from different sources of heat. For example, if I wanted to heat my home by a typical monitor heater or a wood stove or some of your biomass products, how would the carbon emission of those compare? And also for a larger public building, I'm not sure how they get their heat. How would the carbon emission compare with, say, the new biomass products and what they're using now?
Yeah. The carbon emission for biomass is basically, especially wood biomass, is CO2 neutral. The only place where it exceeds at all oil fired would be in particulate matter, but that can be scrubbed out of that. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the valley here, right now you can't burn wood, but you can burn wood pellets, which is biomass. You buy it at Home Depot or other places because it puts out less, it's much more efficient than burning actually wood. These products here, we assume, since it is the same as the wood pellets that are legal to burn right now, would also be legal to burn. And you can burn this right in your fireplace. And it burns much more efficiently than a cord of wood because of the structure of it and the way you position it in your fireplace. Yeah.
I guess I don't quite understand the carbon neutral. You're saying all of those, if you compare them together with each other, it's carbon neutral?
No, the biomass is carbon neutral. And the reason being is because whether you're burning this or whether it's rotting on the ground,
Okay.
it emits the same amount of carbon. Your petroleum has CO2 output, and in fact, there's a study recently, I can't remember who did that, in southeast Alaska, where they looked at the diesel fumes coming out of ships damaging some of the forests. You may know more about this than I do.
Yeah.
But there was a study talking about that, and Skagway, I think it was, yeah. And biomass does not put out that kind of fumes. It is much more ecologically friendly than diesel or gasoline would be.
So that's as long as you're using waste products, that it would be bio-neutral.
Yes. CO2 neutral.
I'd like to ask about the possibility of reducing Juneau's fossil fuel dependence. And what I heard was that transportation and space heating are the two areas where we could have the biggest reduction in Juneau's fossil fuel dependence. And specifically in transportation, I've heard said that moving to electric would be, in the long run, a negative progress in Juneau. So I'm curious, what would be the alternative sources of fueling our transportation here that you might suggest?
Can I clarify one thing? You know, when we talk about shifting home heating oil or automobiles from oil to electric, if we have the hydropower capability, then that would be a good shift. If we don't have the hydropower capacity, then that would be a bad shift. And you know, whether or not we have that hydropower capacity or capacity from other renewable energy depends on whether we find and are able to develop those projects. So I maybe I didn't make that clear before. Now, ultimately, as Steve mentioned earlier, if we can move to a hydrogen-based energy system instead of a carbon-based energy system, then you can run your car on a hydrogen fuel cell or something like that. But in terms of, if you're talking about sort of in the near-term future, a plug-in car or something like that, whether that's good or bad for Juneau depends on where we are with renewable energy development.
I'm actually more interested maybe in the busing issue.
Oh, okay.
Especially with all the tour buses here in the summertime, what direction that should go in if we're looking at reducing our fossil fuel dependence.
When the Lake Dorothy project comes online, we will have power that's surplus to our needs for our firm customers. That surplus power, over and above what the community needs, is committed to Greens Creek, so they can turn off their diesel-fired generators as much as possible. As Juneau's firm loads grow, then we'll take that power away from Greens Creek and give it to our customers. So if the city or the tour companies developed a fleet of electric buses that they plugged in every night, then that power will be taken away from Greens Creek so that it could serve those buses, reducing the carbon output from those buses and increasing the carbon output at Greens Creek. So it gets kind of complicated.
That's why I'm wondering what alternative to electricity would be a good fit for Juneau.
Could I give my version of the answer to that? It's just slightly different from Scott's.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure.
I'm asking whether there's an alternative to electricity for transportation in Juneau. Well, you know, to get off fossil fuels, rather than turning to electricity, is there another way to go?
And my take on it is that AEL&P is already in a process of anticipating load growth, anticipating developing new generation. They have a well laid out plan for Lake Dorothy 1 and 2. Beyond that, I imagine it gets a little more nebulous as to what's going to be developed. But there are other hydro opportunities to develop. There are interties, for example, the Swan-Tai system right now is spilling a very significant amount of its energy. Now that won't be true. That's not true throughout the foreseeable future. But if the Thomas Bay hydro projects are developed, I believe there's over 100 megawatts of capacity there. And if there's an intertie, and there's discussion of an intertie, there's an opportunity to develop that. All these things cost money. In the near term, we discussed earlier the idea that wind energy, if it's feasible technically and economically in the Juneau region, could be used to actually produce some energy that's stored behind your existing hydros. So it might be a relatively low cost, low capital investment to increase the renewable energy available on your grid. Tidal energy is probably a little farther out, geothermal a little farther out, but the near term, I'll come full circle, the near term opportunity to find new sources of renewable energy is energy efficiency. The estimated cost is about 2 cents a kilowatt hour for energy efficiency. So those are all different sources that AEL&P and Juneau have to consider and pursue in terms of alternatives to fossil fuels.
Specifically for alternatives to how to power a bus, it's oil or maybe a fuel cell that runs on hydrogen. That's all I know of.
The idea of electricity, having run an inverter company, there are a lot of issues with battery technology today too, and you have a lot of problems to overcome there technically before it really, I think, become really feasible to do it. The geothermal, and I don't have the experience that these folks do, but I know I've done a lot of study on Iceland. I mean, they've made their whole economy around geothermal, and so the technology is sitting there, and they know how to do it. And perhaps there are ways to look at copying that somewhat and bring it to Southeast Alaska.
The other non-technical, non-wonky viewpoint on what we can do in the short term, and that gets back to the basics. You carpool, you use public transportation. I mean, Juneau has been set up geographically to be so amenable to that. People living in the valley and working downtown. A lot of folks are state office workers, pretty much on a set schedule. We have in the past in this community looked at light rail. It's been determined to be not feasible. But my husband works in state government and in several different departments over the years. I don't think I've ever walked into a state office building, and correct me if I'm wrong, and see a sign that says carpoolers wanted. We don't, tidal power is wonderful. I went down to that conference last February, and it's sexy and it's exciting, but getting into a car with 3 other coworkers and driving out back home, depends on who your coworkers are, but it's not quite as sexy and as exciting. But, it can certainly serve us well in the short term, and it's at a pretty cheap cost.
So Dan, hang on a second, just to chime in there, Rick from San Francisco, to chime in on what Sue said about efficiency, or addressing efficiency too first. Some tour buses in San Francisco are being more energy efficient by replacing double rear tires with with larger single back tires, less friction, more efficient. He doesn't have numbers, but I think, that's the kind of thing we should look at first before we start looking at, I don't know, other alternative fuels. Go ahead,
Okay,
Dan.
my question goes from the transportation to our other big energy consumer, which is heating space. And I have a little historic house down in Douglas. I've got it about as efficient as I can without totally reconstructing it and starting over again, which doesn't seem energy efficient in the long run. I'm sitting there in Douglas on the really cold days when I'm sure our peak energy is just peaking. But I'm looking on the mountaintops, watching them snow blow at fairly significant amounts. Why not more wind energy here in Juneau? It sounds like tidal power isn't quite panning out as maybe being viable, but why not wind energy, particularly during the winter time? Because usually when folks turn up the thermostat, it's on those really windy days. So it seems like that would help with peak consumption, and the technology's there. And I guess that question would be for both Dave and Scott. What's the feasibility of that?
Maybe I want you, okay, I'll go first. We don't have much experience at AEL&P with wind generation, but we're trying to get more. We recognize that there's potential there. The maps we've seen that try to identify commercially viable wind regimes don't seem to show much right here in Juneau. There are high winds on the mountaintops, especially in the wintertime. But from what little I understand about wind generation, when the winds exceed a certain speed, your wind generator is set to lock up and not be designed to generate during those really high times. The other problem with the mountaintops is those are extremely harsh conditions, and when you have icing conditions in your wind generator, that makes a difficult thing. The other thing that's a problem with mountaintop wind generators is these rotor blades are like 150 feet long, and ideally you would drive a big truck up to them and have a big crane to build them. And I'm not sure I see how we could build one on a mountaintop. It may be possible, but I don't know. So wind seems to be most viable when it's easily accessible, when you have relatively steady breezes between certain ranges. Now, having said that, we think that it's worth looking more closely at possible wind generating sites in Juneau. And we actually had a consultant in a couple months ago to look at more closely about where possible wind sites might be. We've talked with Dave at his agency to see about the possibilities of getting a weather tower to start to monitor possible wind sites. So that is something that we need to look at, because if there is a commercially developable site, we need to be doing that sort of thing.
I totally agree with, I've had a lot of experience with wind power and did a lot of it in Europe, in Spain. And the weather conditions here with the snow and things, it would absolutely totally mess up you just couldn't do it. You'd ice up very, very quickly if you were on top of a mountain. What we did off the coast of Spain is actually put large 3.5 megawatt windmills 11 miles off the coast. You couldn't even see them, and brought in DC power lines underwater and inverted it. So it would get AC power, and that seemed to work pretty well. Each blade on those were actually 105 meters long.
Ooh.
These were as big as the Empire State Building, and 3.5 megawatts, as you know, is a lot of power. Whether that, that was being funded by the government, but whether that would be economically feasible to put off the coast of Alaska, I don't really know. And also, you'd have the cold weather issues that you don't have off the coast of Spain.
And I'll just keep my response short, but absolutely, it ought to be studied. And AEL&P is taking steps in that direction. Our wind energy program manager is Martina Dabo, and you can reach her through our 800 number, 888-300-8534. Martina recently did a screening study for Sitka on wind energy development, and she just told me yesterday that she would be happy to do the same thing for Juneau. We also have a high-density wind resource atlas of the region, and that can be used for initial screening purposes. Scott's right, the wind energy tends to be on top of mountains, and many of those places are not accessible, and there are icing issues, although there are wind turbines operating successfully in Arctic and subarctic Alaska. But if you get very far from roads and transmission lines, it gets very expensive. And the other place where there is, in this region, there's significant wind resources along the waterways. Yeah, Taku Inlet and yeah, actually, if you look at the wind map, the class 7, the highest class of wind resource, almost all the major waterways in Southeast Alaska are class 7 wind resource. Now, if it's 600 feet deep, that doesn't help you much unless you put it on a floating platform. But AEL&P has got transmission lines that go a significant distance in 2 directions. Correct me if I'm wrong. One is toward to Snettisham, 26 miles?
It's 43 miles,
I'm sorry.
actually.
And then over to Greens Creek. And so those would be the places to look for wind energy resources. Scott Waterman mentioned the possibility of a tidal energy site with a wind turbine mounted on top. If you're taking the time to bring in a crane and all the equipment to drive the heavy piles and bringing the transmission line over, it might make sense to consider those at the same time. These are all things that I would not discourage in any way. I would encourage Juneau and AEL&P to study these things, analyze, and partner with the state and other resources. It's a good thing to find out about it. Whether it's economic or whether Juneau wants to go that way, it's not a given, I don't think.
My biggest worry is that we'll find a really good wind resource and that it will be in Berners Bay.
So
Good
just
news,
to-
bad news.
We can make it.
Just to quickly follow up on that, I'm pretty interested, and I've always been an advocate of residential scale turbines, wind turbines. You know, your whisper lights that you could power a house with or augment power, local power consumption with. And Dave, you've suggested that it's not really the way to go compared to utility scale wind energy projects. And so one of the things that worries me is the potential environmental costs of large scale wind projects. I know there's some data out there that questions that, but I guess from the efficiency standpoint, and can you, like, why not advocate for local scale? Why shouldn't I go out and spend my $4,000 and buy my Xantrex inverter and power my house up?
Well, in Juneau, particularly with your cheap electricity and hydro, it's going to be hard to justify that if you're on the grid. But the point I was trying to make about residential is utility scale wind turbines today in Alaska are expensive. The electricity, it's not free. It's very expensive. For example, the small turbines that have been 100 kilowatt turbines that have been put in western Alaska, in Tooksuk Bay, they cost over $1 million a piece, and they put out an average of 20 kilowatts. So if you scale further down, the economics are going to get worse. And this is in the category of things that are technically feasible, but maybe not the best thing economically. There's limited funds and limited resources to address the issues we're trying to address: sustainability, energy costs, climate change. So if you figure there's finite resources to work on those things, then we want to do the most cost-effective things. Wind energy is in the mix of things to consider. Residential wind energy or solar photovoltaics, I think, is pretty much outside the range of what's, compared to the other things that you can do. It's just not the most effective thing to do.
I'm glad to hear the word sustainability, because I've been hearing a lot about resources, about technologies, about efficiencies. It seems like we've been hearing a lot about that this morning so far. But when I come back to the kind of overall theme of sustainability, it's like ultimately what's sustainable. We're talking about environmental sustainability. We're talking about sustainability of human populations. And on that last end, I mean, we're talking about consumption when it comes down to it. And I'm not really hearing a lot of ideas outside of resource and technological efficiency kind of approaches to consumption. And it seems like there are lots of other things we could be doing beyond voluntarism. Voluntarism is fine, but it's never going to be a solution. are there ways of changing entire rate structures, for example, so that families who have small, like I'm thinking my phone company, right? I work out this package deal with them. I use under a certain number of minutes per month, and that's my rate. And if I go over that number of minutes per month, that, or, you know, or on the average, whatever, I pay a substantially higher rate. You know, in things that would directly be incentives for consumers to want to consume less, see a direct personal benefit. It's hard this year when my wife and I are consuming 67% of last year, but we're paying about 120% of last year. You know, that's discouraging. That's not encouraging me as the good citizen to do the right thing. So are there ways of non-technical, non-technological approaches to some of these things? And I know that they involve setting standards, regulating, doing all those things that Americans don't like so well, but, you know, if we're talking about sustainability of human populations, which is what it's really all about. I guess the AEL&P is what goes first.
So I guess the answer is yes, there are things, and you alluded to that when you sort of indicated that these are decisions that society or politicians or regulatory agencies may need to make.
Maybe in conjunction. I mean, I think about my total utility bill, right? I mean, my electricity bill wouldn't be so bad if I didn't have to pay as much for 3 garbage cans as I did for 1 garbage can.
Sure.
And if
Sure.
my water and sewage wasn't this large flat rate instead of an adjustable rate, where if I was, you know what I'm saying? Then electricity wouldn't seem so bad.
Right. And so your suggestion that say maybe those that use more could pay more, maybe you get your first chunk of electricity at a relatively low rate and the next, certainly if our customers cried for something like that, we'd provide it. If the agency that regulates us says this will be important, we will provide that. I don't know if we're going to lead the charge on that, because I see a lot of really upset customers with that. But certainly if people wanted to do it, we could certainly move in that direction.
In the business I'm involved in Southern California, they do have time of day use metering plus certain hurdles, and that's how it's applied down there. And right now, as far as solar panels go, I mean, you spend $40,000 to put them on your home down there, so your payback is really long. But they also are able to hook those back into the grid. So a lot of the places, the highest power costs are like between, I can't remember exactly, 10 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and when people have the air conditioning loads on. So it's also best for solar power. And so they sell the solar power back into the grid, and the utility buys it back at that rate. By law, they have to down there. And then you buy it back at night when you need it for your lighting. And it's a little bit of a complex equation, but it does encourage, number one, conservation, and it also encourages putting in your own personal investment, because you can actually, we even have one customer that actually claims he gets to pay the check back from the utility every month because he's selling more than he's using.
So, you know, it kind of gets back to that whole policy, the policies, the laws, the regulations, as well as you know, some of the more corporate responsibility type issues. For example, net metering, which Greg was referring to, bill was presented to the state legislature, and it's not going to make it through this year. I do not know much about it. I'm sure Scott knows more. All I've heard is that many of the utilities are very much against it, and if they're against it, you can bet your bottom dollar many legislators are against it. So the policy realm still is playing a big role. I mean, we can carpool all we want, but until we get some more, and you know, it's tough in Alaska to get really proactive, cutting-edge type of legislation through our legislators, and but we can do it if we want it. Technology isn't going to solve all our problems.
Before I'd like to make just one quick point on that. There may be opportunities to improve the residential situation with regards to rates, but as far as I know, AEL&P has the most sophisticated residential rate structure that I've ever seen in Alaska. I don't know how many different residential rates you've got. One of them's had demand.
We've got a bunch of them, but none of them are the increasing,
Right, none of them is particularly what you're talking about, but it's a very sophisticated rate structure. It's targeting efficiency with regards to space heating and heat pumps, and you've got almost the cheapest electricity in the state. So there may be ways to improve it, but it's really a good situation.
Before I go on for my question, it becomes clear that we all need to write letters to the editor, to the governor, to our lawmakers, and we need to be relentless. And then these things will happen, because a lot of the ideas I've heard are really good. I want to stress the biomass beauty, even the one on the floor. It's not a new technology. It's already proven. We don't have to do studies, and it's something we can do now, all of us. An aside is I don't like cutting down trees. I'm not real happy about using seaweed either. I like letting things be. It uses waste, and especially in an area like Southeast Alaska, where waste is a huge issue. And I don't know if you've been to the dump lately, but it's an unappealing place. I was there yesterday, and here are the boots. We can use our waste in a positive way. Places you might not have thought of have a lot of paper waste. Hospital, the university, the government, the cruise ships. We can tap into all of that without cutting down trees. My question for Mr. Brown is, what can current business owners, homeowners, and the government people do to use the biomass right now?
Well, as far as using it right now, there's absolutely nothing that prevents you from using it right now. As I mentioned, you go to Home Depot or Hearth Products, I think down in Ock Bay, or not Ock Bay, down by the airport, and you can buy, wood pellets. And those work very well for your home. That's how I heat my home now instead of using oil. These kind of products, as I say, to her point, that 15 years ago when I used to have an apartment in Munich for a while, Munich, Germany, this is how we heated with it. This is not a new technology. It's been around forever. Probably a lot longer than 15 years, probably 50 years. So that could be used right now. The thing I think there are two things preventing us. Number one is it would be very nice to get some state funding to do this project. And the second thing is, as soon as we can identify a customer, we can clearly like the airport, they use 270,000 gallons right now of diesel to heat the place every year. As soon as we get a customer, then we can put forth the financing for it. Next Wednesday, I'm meeting with a guy named Austin C., who's the Citibank head of their alternative energy fund, and he has $3 billion to invest. And I've been talking to him about this project. And, he's saying, well, you get a customer for me. And because the thing financially, he knows it makes sense. He's already done this in the northeastern United States. And, he will look at financing it for us. Literally, it's not very much money. You can do this 18,000 tons for, $3 million and be in production, either on a barge or on the land somewhere to produce it. But all of us could change today. And as I say, I reduced my cost by 30% in my home just by going to wood pellets over oil.
Is there some kind of benefit as far as paying for it if a business would agree to convert?
One of the things,
put in a boiler.
Actually, I talked with the mayor about this not too long ago, which probably is what helped me get me on this this panel. One of the things that Citibank, or we've been talking to them about, is they did some calculations and I did some calculations, and it looks like one of the issues is always budgeting if you want to convert like the capital. And so what their proposal was is that knowing about what we can save by going to biomass, that we would just fix the oil costs for the last 12 months, and that's what the Capitol building, if we use that for an example, we continue to pay going forward for 3 years, whatever that fee is. And Citibank would be paying for the conversion, would make the conversion to biomass. They would get their return because now they're providing a lot less cost to heat the building. And 3 years afterward, the city could have the the new equipment, and they can continue to reap the benefit of the reduced cost in doing that. And the investors in the eco funds of Citibank would, get their money back that way. So it wouldn't even be much of a budgeting issue if we wanted to do that.
Why don't we go another 5 minutes till 12 o'clock, if that's okay with the roundtable folks.
So, in my mind, diversity is really important, because any time that we put all of our stock into one thing, we end up, raping one segment. And so I think these creative personal methods of having a diversity of energy sources so that we have sustainability is really important. Just talking last week to someone in Toke, where they're trying to produce biomass from all of these potential fire hazard areas. There's tons of biomass potential to cut down these swaths to prevent forest fires. Honestly, the carbon dioxide that's released from forest fires and the potential danger to communities, it makes sense. One of the things that I hate to hear is us saying, no, don't let individuals take responsibility for power generation or for being frugal pertaining to wind generation or what have you. Because I think that as people take initiative on their own, they will take personal responsibility. That will help them to lower the amount that they consume. One of the things I wanted to ask about biomass, is there, like going to Home Depot and such to buy pellets, there's got to be a more economical way to get a hold of this stuff. Is there some timeline you have to making, bulk biomass available to consumers in Alaska?
Well, you can make it available, and it's actually shipped in containers very similar to looking to oil trucks, and you put your pellets in there. Pellets come in basically 3 different sizes. The little size you see at Home Depot, they come in a 1-inch size, and which is about that long, about 1 inch around, and they just blow it right out of the truck, frankly, so you can carry it around that way. Now, it does take up more volume than oil, but the advantage of doing it that way is you don't end up with the paper bags or plastic bags left over, which is a real problem for me. I end up with 1,000 of these damn bags at the end of the month. That's an exaggeration, because I use less than a bag a day, but you end up with still got to get rid of this bag. Going back to your other comment, and I'm a great believer in doing things myself, quite frankly, but you look at the utility rate in Juneau and with the hydro, and it's outstanding. I've done several calculations, and maybe somebody can do it better than I can, but if you're on the grid and we're generating with hydro, that's about as good as it's going to get, from what I can tell. If you're sitting over in Shelter Island, though, sure, put in a battery system. Fishing lodges, there's one in Ketchikan that actually uses photovoltaic solar cells on top of it, because fishing lodges open in the summer. We have long summer days there, with a lot of sun down there, and that's how they actually power virtually all of their lodge. And they have a small little generator, which I won't go into technology, but you can use a lot smaller generator if you're using batteries. So if they do have to use a generator, it becomes much more efficient. So those things are available, but the hydro power generated locally here is pretty efficient.
I'd like to speak and kind of carry on what Travis was saying there. One of the first things you do when you convert your house, which I'm sure you're familiar with, over to an intertie system where you have an inverter and a battery bank, is you seek out phantom loads. And it's the annoying little things like the clocks that are on all your little utilities that are on. All of a sudden I had all this battery power, where'd it go? And you just do this little assessment and you find out where your usage is. And I believe what Travis was speaking about, obtaining energy independence, is the fact that once you take a personal responsibility and you do the inordinate investment, which I believe you're speaking about compared to grid power, but you get your wind generator, you figure out a way to power alternatively, that responsibility is an immeasurable cost. And that's something that I believe Travis and alternative energy providers are referring to. And you say you should go by any means necessary to produce your own power, or a microgrid kind of solution. Utilities, I can see why they don't like it. It could especially like in Southern California, you'll have a lot less customers. That's one thing to consider. But it's amazing what can happen once you start taking your own personal responsibility. That $4,000 investment, you're suddenly seeing, oh, well, I'm losing all this power at these places. I should really, cut that out. So, I think that's, again, just to reiterate that point, that when you're saying that you're really interested in wind power and people are encouraging you to shy away from it, I say you shy towards it, and you do everything you can to take that personal responsibility.
In a place like Elfin Cove, they're paying 53 cents a kilowatt hour. I was told just the other day at a meeting I was at, there are places you can use alternative energy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
do it for a lot less than 53 cents a kilowatt hour, I can guarantee you that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of Arctic villages are paying $1.25 a kilowatt hour. It's an impending crisis that's causing a lot. Like here in Juneau, it's very comfortable, and it's more of a project kind of thing. But in the day of PlayStation 3s and plasma TVs and these techno fetishes, I don't see how anyone can say, yeah, you shouldn't spend that money, because that's just ridiculous and irresponsible. It's like we are ridiculous and irresponsible in our consumerism, so we should probably do it like on responsible purchases.
Well, why don't we end it on that note? It's 12 o'clock, that's a good one. And we're going to be doing lunch over in the lake room just across the way if you want to talk to any of the speakers or keep discussing this. And then we're going to return in the afternoon, and we'll have more roundtable discussion, a little more focused on UAS and the university system. But please join us. And thanks to the roundtable participants and the media services.